Welcome to the workshop, Friends Matter, Promoting Friendships and Social Connections During a Pandemic. Our speaker is Zach Rossetti. Zach Rossetti is an associate professor of special education at the Wheelock College at Boston University, a former special education teacher and inclusion promoters from New Hampshire. His research is on social interactions and friendships between students with and without IDD. His research also looks at family agreement in schools and communities, family schools partnerships of diverse families and siblings and roles. In relationship, he co-authored Affirming Disability Straight Bands Pro-Trust of Culturally Diverse Families.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Massachusetts Down Syndrome Congress 37th Annual Conference, virtual edition. Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation titled Friends Matter, Promoting Friendship and Social Connections During a Pandemic. My name is Zach Rossetti. I'm an associate professor at Boston University in the Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. I work in the special ed program, and I've been conducting research on friendships between students with and without intellectual disability and developmental disabilities for a little while now, as well as research on family engagement in the special ed process, in IEP meetings and supporting friendships. I'm really excited to be here today and present on this topic, which means so much to so many of us and is often challenging. Today's focus is really in two parts. First, an overview of friendship facilitation that held true prior to COVID and can help guide us during the remainder of the pandemic and beyond. And then the second part will focus on promoting friendship during a pandemic. And here I have adapted and kind of used parts of a presentation that was developed in collaboration with Jim Ross from the Widening the Circle project at the Arc of Mass, which focuses on friendships for students and adults with intellectual disability. So I start often with my brother Todd when I think about friendship, because he was my motivation initially and continues to be in many ways. I'm the oldest of 6 in my family. Todd was the fourth one of us, and he was a really phenomenal guy. An amazing brother, amazing person. He was a huge Red Sox fan, Bruins fan, Boston sports. We're from New Hampshire. Huge sweet tooth, loved chocolate cake, and he was incredibly outgoing. He was so social, which I always found even more remarkable because he did all of that without speaking. He used a wheelchair, as you can see. He limited control of his body and needed lots of support to get throughout his day due to cerebral palsy. And communicating and connecting with others and just that social magnetism that he had without speaking was one of many lessons that he taught me. Specific to today's presentation, Todd, like many of your children and students, I imagine, went to school. He was included. I don't think the inclusive ed, he was included during the 80s and 90s. I don't think the inclusive ed was the best. He wasn't included in a lot of academic classes. He was off to the side a lot of the time, but he was included, physically present in classes throughout his schooling. And he was very well known, probably the most popular student in his classes or in his grade each year. He was very well known. And then I started to notice that he, despite being so well known, that he didn't really ever, other than a few isolated incidents, receive calls from classmates at home or do anything outside of school with his classmates without disabilities. And so I started to think about that a little more critically and realized that he was included and he was definitely accepted by his peers, but not befriended. And that dynamic really, while there are some positive pieces to it, really troubled me as his brother, frustrated me, angered me, because I knew how incredible he was and how much fun I had when I hung out with him as his brother. And I feel like too many people missed out on the privilege of knowing him in that way and potentially developing friendships with him. And I've since talked to many other families about this. One mother told me that her son was similarly high-fived to death. For Todd, people would come up everywhere and say hi and kind of give him a high five or fist bump and then walk away. And I think they didn't know what to do. I think part of it was they said hi and thought that was nice, and then walked on to their real friends. And so Todd wasn't kind of in that pool of potential friends. And so I wonder, how many of you, if we were in person, I could see some heads nodding or maybe people would ask questions. I wonder how many of you have similar situations. And there are other dynamics too. The greetings only, the high five to death, being a mascot, kind of overly kind or benevolent rather than kind of authentic interactions with peers. And there are many other dynamics too. But the point here is that it was a limit or kind of a barrier to get to what I consider to be authentic and meaningful friendship. And so today's strategies are based on research and also developed with this and this dynamic for Todd and other similar dynamics in mind. So benefits of friendship. I'm going to do this very quickly because I think if you're here, you agree with all of this. Friendship has many benefits. And generally, people with friends are happier, healthier, and safer. And especially people with disabilities. Todd, while he has many strengths and we always had the highest of expectations for him, there are certain vulnerabilities when he doesn't speak and can't control his body. And so we always thought friends, in addition to the benefits of friendship, would also be a protective force against bullies and others who might harm him in other ways. Friendships create community. I think the more inclusive a class, a school, a neighborhood, a town is, the more caring and welcoming and better off everybody is. So there are many, many benefits for all of us. The research has shown pretty consistently, let me just move this in case that's in your way, that despite the benefits of friendship and the risks of social isolation, that students with intellectual disability and students with developmental disabilities like autism tend to be on the social periphery, even if in inclusive settings, and that friendships between students with and without intellectual disabilities infrequently, if at all, extend beyond the school walls. Students with intellectual disability in inclusive settings in a couple of studies interacted more frequently with peers who also had ID, intellectual disability, than with peers without disabilities, despite being included, despite the physical proximity. And at all ages, individuals with intellectual disability tend to interact most or only with family, paid staff, and others with intellectual disability. Students with autism spectrum disorder in many studies pretty consistently had at least one friend, which is a great sign. But compared to students with higher incidence disabilities and students without disabilities, they tend to have fewer and lower quality friendships, meaning shorter duration, lower levels of companionship, unilateral interactions rather than mutual, meaning both people choose it, and reciprocal, meaning kind of the same type, equal exchange during the interactions. And overall, just kind of lacking in deep connections and lasting friendships. However, other studies pretty consistently have shown that meaningful and authentic friendships are possible. And the cool thing about these studies, and I reviewed a lot of them in a literature review, was that students with the most significant needs, and so we're not just talking students without difficult behaviors at times, or students who were very social and had very clear, consistent communication. Students with the most significant needs, who experienced some or all of those things pretty regularly, we're still developing friendships. And that the key factor in developing friendships had less to do with the students and their specific skills or behaviors, and more to do with social opportunities. Frequent, consistent opportunities and inclusive settings with peers, without, and with disabilities over time. So it's more about the social opportunity. And I find that incredibly optimistic and hopeful, because we can control that. Sometimes, like with my brother Todd, outward performances of new skills or skill improvement can take lots of time. Todd, as someone with cerebral palsy, maybe wasn't going to show or be able to interact much differently than he did. What you see was what you get. And while students are in school and do learn skills, it can sometimes take long term. And this finding tells me that in the interim, while kids are learning skills and developing skills, they can and should be developing friendships if they have the social opportunities to do so. So part of this that's really important to know is how all kids develop friendship. And this is really cool because it's fairly straightforward, and it pinpoints certain difficulties that students with Down syndrome or maybe autism, other intellectual disability might struggle with. So the surface structure refers to social exchanges that characterize friendship at any given moment, specific surface level activities that are developmentally normative for students of a particular age, culture, gender, etc. These are basically just social behaviors, what kids do, what students do together. That's the surface structure. So think, what do 7th grade boys do? What do 10th graders who like the arts do? Those are surface level activities. And thinking of my own daughter, who's in 3rd grade right now during the pandemic, she does many things, but one of the new and most frequent, I'll admit to having lots of screen time, unfortunately, in our family during this time, One of the new and most frequent things that she does is play Roblox. It's an interactive video game with lots of different games within it that she can go online with and play with her friends. And so they FaceTime and play this game a lot. So that would be the surface level activities. The deep structure refers to the social meaning or essence of a relationship and symmetrical reciprocity in the relationship. Basically, it's the deep structure reciprocity of friendship, behavioral and affective reciprocity, meaning that we'll say two students like each other and they like playing together. That's the behavioral piece. So through participation in the surface level activities, things that kids like to do at that certain age and your students or children might like to do, through participation in service level activities, two individuals develop the deep structure reciprocity of friendship. And they do so through affective sharing, which is defined as positive social engagement and synchrony, which is simultaneous action. We've all learned about synchronous and asynchronous classes during this time of pandemic. Through positive social engagement and synchrony, and consists of time spent in synchronous interaction and responsiveness. And so that basically just means doing those things that kids of that age do together, interacting while they do it, and enjoying it. And if you have those things, you're likely to get to the deep structure, authentic, meaningful friendship. So does that make sense? And as you're hearing me speak, I'm wondering if you're thinking of possible difficulties that your children and students might have. Some students with autism struggle with the interactive piece. So they might be playing Roblox, or they might be making a marble run together or doing something else together, but it's more parallel. There isn't the interaction. And so they have the affective sharing, they're doing something together. They don't have the interactive piece. So I'd want to focus on that. How can we support that? And then I'm wondering if both both children are enjoying it. For some other students, and especially during this time, doing things together has become difficult. We'll talk about that. I want to keep moving to pay attention to time. So the final part of the overview that is going to kind of be the foundation for talking about all of this during the pandemic is this notion of a social facilitation framework. And this is based on research, my own and others, and my experience as a teacher and an inclusion facilitator, and learning from lots of teachers and families and individuals with Down syndrome themselves. And this is a broad framework that can and should be individualized to each student. So like with all of these pieces of the presentation today, some may apply, some may not. Your specific child or student may struggle in some areas, but not others. All of this has to be individualized because everyone is so unique. And when you add a possible friend, that's another unique individual. Their interactions are unique, friendships are unique. So this broad framework helps us figure out where to look. And then the strategies kind of fit within the framework, but need to be individualized based on your children's or students' ages, genders, interests, skills, etc. So I'm going to be talking, the rest of the presentation is going to be talking about pieces of this framework and applying them to the pandemic. And the friendship mindset is kind of the first and foremost strategy. I'll define that in a moment. That's used to try to increase the quantity of social opportunities as much as possible. But then also thinking back to the importance of kids interacting and enjoying their interactions, improving social interactions. Because someone could certainly be interacting a lot, but it may be parallel or it may not be enjoyable for both parties, for both students. Many of our students will need direct support strategies during, before, or after the times that they interact with peers. And those direct support strategies can be about connecting peers who aren't connecting on their own, maybe interpreting behaviors for a child with Down syndrome or for peers without disabilities. And then preparing, again, either students with Down syndrome or peers without disabilities for the interaction. How does someone communicate? What's going to make this the most successful and enjoyable interaction? And of course, we want to incorporate students' strengths and interests. And then during the school time, in-person times, focus on social times during the day. That's kind of pre-pandemic. All right, so let's focus on promoting friendship, incorporating many of those things during the pandemic. So as you all know, as we all know all too well, social opportunities during a pandemic are a little bit different. There are clearly more obstacles to supporting friendships among students with and without disabilities during these times of isolation, physical distancing, and virtual learning. I feel like much of our time is spent online in those little boxes on Zoom, like I am now. Maybe in person, as you can see the students in the hallway with their masks, but with precautions and likely limited to a few days, I imagine, for many of us. And students with Down syndrome and without, with other disabilities, largely are spending time with their families, as you can see in that picture of the little girl with her parents. So there's lots of physical separation. Access to technology and services has been challenging. Some students with Down syndrome may not be as adept at using technology or using it independently, which can affect what they do or how they interact with peers. So there are a lot of new barriers. Some might be flourishing during this time. And I wish we were in person to hear some comments about that as well. But, it's not all doom and gloom during this time. But there are many barriers. So the developing a friendship mindset, this first strategy, it applied pre-COVID and it certainly applies now. This is the first and foundational strategy, I believe, to the most effective strategies and supports towards promoting friendship. This means thinking constantly about the quantity and quality of your students' or children's social interaction opportunities. Pay close attention to how students with and without disabilities are interacting together. Consider the social implications of any support or academic decisions. The type of instruction and grouping, adult proximity, pre-COVID, post-COVID, we have to make decisions based on health and safety first and foremost, but considering social connections shortly after that, I think is important during this time because social emotional health and social connections are critical for all of us during this time. Strive to support students with Down syndrome, your children with Down syndrome, to do as much as their classmates each and every day. Do you have a good grasp of what students without disabilities, what peers are doing? Even if on remote instruction days, are they getting together after school, distanced at the park? Is that an opportunity? Things like that. And most importantly, believe that the student with Down syndrome not only can develop and maintain authentic friendship, but would make a wonderful friend. And one way I think about this, because it can be challenging, for some to think that, and then if you think that to enact it, because it involves both high expectations, which many of you may have, but also risk taking in different ways. So, those are all individual decisions, but as much as possible, part of this is kind of reflects the saying, shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. So be thinking about authentic friendship, as many connections as possible with as many people as possible. And that may or may not happen, but at least I think you'll find that you'll figure out ways to support your student or child to be interacting with with a few more people, or a little more frequently with the same person, that type of thing. I want to tell a quick story about this, the high expectations and the risk taking, in relation to my brother Todd. So it's a sibling story, but I think it is relevant here. Like I said, Todd couldn't control his body too well due to his cerebral palsy, and we were from New Hampshire. So I remember one winter when he was about 7 and I was probably 14. He was 7 years younger than me. We were at home alone, which was rare in our large family, and I asked him if he wanted to go sledding. It was the winter, and I just had this realization that we had never been sledding together. And his affirmative response, and when he gets excited, is sitting up in his wheelchair and kind of moving his arms and laughing, which he did. So I got him ready, and we went outside to this hill in our backyard, beyond our backyard. And we got to the top of the hill, and I put him in the sled in front of me, and kind of held him, and I was sitting beside him, and I asked if he was ready to go, and he kind of did one of these, got very excited, kind of headbutted me, but we pushed off slowly at first, as sometimes happens sledding, and then a little faster, and then we picked up speed, and we're flying down the hill. And I still to this day just have this clear memory of that moment. Cold day, picking up speed. We haven't done it before. We're finally sledding, and then all of a sudden noticing a little bump, a little jump ahead of us that our brothers or sisters must have built earlier in the day or the day before. And so I tried to steer clear of it. We kind of hit the side of it and got a little bit of air and fell. And Todd fell face first in the snow. I fell on top of him and rolled off. He can't control his body, so I sat up. He's still face first in the snow, shoulders heaving. I roll him over. He has tears. I see some blood on his lip. I wipe it off with snow, and he's still kind of like heaving and tears. And then he finally made a sound, and it was his laughter. He was laughing, and so I said, "Buddy, are you okay?" And he kept laughing. But I was scared. I didn't know how hurt he was. So we went inside, and in the house, and I wiped his lip again, and that was fine. But by the time we got in, he started having pretty significant swelling. We fell this way, so on his right eye. And so I got a washcloth with ice and put that on there and put him in his wheelchair, and was dreading our mom's imminent arrival. Despite being a teenager, I was petrified. She came home, and I ran out to meet her, and I just blurted out, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I took Todd sledding, and we fell. I think he's okay. He's not hurt. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And she walked by me. She just looked at me and then walked by me, which I didn't think was a good sign, into the other room, the living room where Todd was. And I followed her in there, and she asked Todd, "Did you go sledding?" And he stood up in his wheelchair and waved his arms and laughed the way that he did. And then she said, "Nice eye." And he kind of laughed again. And I blurted out again, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And she kind of looked at me, waited till I was done apologizing, and then said something that's remained with me and that I think is so relevant for thinking about friendships and all of this work. She looked at me and she just said, "Don't ever apologize for being a brother." And she kind of walked away. And then she turned back and she said, "Just don't fall next time." And I had I had already internalized that. Todd was always Todd first. Like I said, I thought it was a privilege growing up with him. He was my favorite sibling. Sorry, everybody else. But his visible sledding injuries challenged that for me. I thought I hurt him, and then I kind of resorted back to he's not Todd first. He's my disabled brother, Todd first. And my mother's words were a powerful reminder that have stuck with me. And the application to this work is that person first orientation. Peers need to see it, and we need to model it as parents, siblings, and teachers, because they may not get it on their own. They need to learn about that from us. Allowing the full range of the human experience, human social emotional experience, and the dignity of risk. He got hurt. It could have been worse. It wasn't. So that's hard as parents and teachers, I know. But to whatever degree we're comfortable with, authentic friendships include arguments and fights and making up and doing things together that maybe your parents or teachers wouldn't always approve of. And to get there, maybe I'm not saying, break the rules or get hurt, obviously, but like shoot for the moon, like get close as possible is part of this. So there's our mother. She's phenomenal. Okay, gonna keep moving here. I could talk about this all day. I don't want this to be too long for you all watching. Increase the quantity of social opportunities with a friendship mindset. We can facilitate social interactions between students with and without disabilities throughout the day, whether learning in classrooms or remotely. And like I said, a lot of this relies on some modeling of how students with and without disabilities can interact. And then thinking through what are some new social opportunities that we can create or facilitate. And what are some possible missed opportunities, missed social opportunities that we can better take advantage of? So those are the ways to increase opportunities: modeling, creating new opportunities, and taking advantage of missed social opportunities. Excuse me. And so not the next slide, but the slides after that are going to focus on this during the COVID times. So I want to keep moving. Improve the quality of social interactions. So we want to think about both, because like I said, you can increase interactions, and they may not result in friendship because students weren't enjoying themselves for some reason. Two students may interact frequently, but their social interactions could be one-sided, surface level, focused on help and support only, rather than reciprocity and companionship, or otherwise not be conducive to the development of authentic friendship. Higher quality interactions include more than sharing space, being polite, and interacting superficially. Our goal is that social interaction opportunities between students with and without Down syndrome go beyond mere acceptance, greetings, other surface level interactions, and just working together in class, to instead be mutual, reciprocal, and based on shared interests and common social experiences across multiple settings over time. So that's a lot, but that's what we're shooting for. And it doesn't happen at once, but thinking about the quality of interactions helps us get there. Higher quality interactions are also those that are enjoyable and successful for the students. Sometimes students with and without disabilities may begin to interact, but then encounter a difficulty that stops the interaction. Two types of low quality social opportunities are squandered interactions, where there might be an initiation from a peer, but no response, or kind of an asocial response from the student with Down syndrome or intellectual disability. And then stalled interactions between students with and without Down syndrome that start off well, but then take a turn for the worse. So we recommend that teachers, paraprofessionals, parents, family members pay attention, if possible, to these quality components of social interaction opportunities. And if you're in proximity, letting kids interact, but if you notice that it's taking a turn for the worse, kind of jumping in and trying to provide support or redirecting one or both of the students to get back to the more positive, successful, enjoyable part of the interaction. One way to focus on the quality of social interactions, social opportunities, is to convey students' strengths. Students tend, and the reason we do this is because students tend to befriend others they perceive as being valued in their classroom or school community. Thus, in the special ed or intellectual disability research, this refers to or reflects social role valorization by Wolfensberger, having a meaningful role, being seen as a potential friend. That's what I think Todd and maybe some of your children and students may not have. So we need to find ways to convey the strengths and capabilities of students with disabilities, look for opportunities for them to share those in meaningful ways, meaningful role. One way to do this is by creating group activities that incorporate students' strengths or interests. This can still be done during the pandemic virtually or distanced outside, maybe. And we'll talk about some examples now that specifically get at that. Oh, but I have this scenario. So the way this framework works is kind of applying those larger strategies and ideas, the components of the framework, to very specific situations that oftentimes have pretty straightforward or intuitive needs within them. So looking at this, Sarah, a third grader with Down syndrome, wanted to jump rope with her classmates at recess. She asked to be next to jump, but they ignored her. Several classmates took turns ahead of her. Then Sarah walked in the way and grabbed the rope. She said it was her turn and wanted to play. Her classmates yelled at her and for the recess monitor. What would you do? If you were the recess monitor? What would you do if you were Sarah's parent or teacher and you heard about this after recess? I imagine you're thinking of some reactions, responses, strategies, and supports, both for Sarah and her peers. Friendship is always reciprocal, involves both parties. Too often we only focus on students with Down syndrome, what they can or cannot do. But friendships involve both, and the context. In this case, recess, jumping rope. Other contexts might have other dynamics. There are ways to prepare Sarah and her classmates maybe a little bit better for this type of interaction during recess ahead of time. There are ways to respond in the moment. There are ways to build skills that might lend Sarah and or her classmates to be more successful, social emotional learning, other specific skills, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the way this framework is applied. And the goal here was not to necessarily answer this for Sarah. Sarah doesn't necessarily need to go first. She can wait her turn. The classmates, but I will. She can learn to wait her turn. Classmates certainly shouldn't go ahead of her. Sarah walking in the way and the grabbing the rope seems a pretty reasonable response to students going ahead of her when she waited her turn. So I, maybe putting in some guidelines. Yeah, let's keep moving. Maybe we can come back to this. during the pandemic, there are a number of protocols we're expected to follow, right? To keep everyone safe, and they can be seen as barriers, but within all of them, there are ways to interact, and there are some opportunities that hopefully, I imagine you're taking advantage of, or trying to, at least recognizing them, and maybe we'll add some others here. Um, Staying physically distanced from each other can be challenging, especially in school. Outdoors, there's a little more flexibility, I think most would agree. My daughter told me the other day that, they're fairly strict at her school, which is great, around the protocols for being healthy and safe. When they eat, it's very strict because they take their masks off. And they're actually, I didn't realize this until my daughter said it, they haven't been allowed to talk during snack or lunch all year, um, which doesn't seem great. Uh, but some students with Down syndrome and other developmental disabilities, um, may not speak, or have communication difficulties, difficulty being understood. So this kind of puts people on a level playing field, and I would take advantage of that as much as possible. And my daughter told me that she and one of her friends in class, because they can't talk, figured out a way to interact. They have a staring contest 6 feet across without talking, and have been using some of the signs, ASL signs that they know, and making up their own gestures. So there are ways to interact. Um, Wearing masks, if it's possible, there are ways to find customized masks that accent someone's personality or interests. That could be an icebreaker around social interactions and friendships. Or using transparent material so that people can see expressions a little more. That's important for those maybe individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing, who are using sign language and lip reading, as part of their communication. Staying in cohorts and small groups. I have another slide about that, but when you're meeting at school with the same cohort over time, it's even more imperative to try to build social interactions within the cohort as well as outside the cohort. But the one thing that stands out is we've all, I think, to whatever degree we can, been outside as much as possible. Um, and I think that is where a lot of the social facilitation work probably has been for you all, and it needs to be during this time of pandemic. Because outside, all kinds of cooperative, physically distanced activities can take place. As you can see in the picture, some inherently include distance. When you're throwing or kicking a ball, or playing some games that inherently involve distance, those are key right now. Running, track and field activities, distanced yoga, distanced Zumba, nature walks, park meetups. These are things that families that we've done, certainly with our daughter on our own, especially early on in the pandemic. And then we gradually have been doing more and more with friends, as much as possible, to have that social connection and those opportunities. Park meetups, having a snack together outside. Who lives near you? Who can you commute to? Is there a park or open space? A trail. If you live near the ocean, a beach. Biking, scooting, other wheeled vehicles, trikes. All of these things are ways to adhere to pandemic protocols, but consider possible social opportunities within them. And that's, I think, the best that we can do right now. I mentioned using cohorts for connections. We're a little late in the pandemic, so hopefully, that the educators in the audience and For family members, hopefully your children's teachers and administrators were thoughtful and took care when establishing cohorts so that they were inclusive, that students with Down syndrome weren't just lumped together, but inclusive classes became inclusive cohorts as much as possible, and that existing friends and potential friends who seemed interested or kind of helped out, your students and children were placed in their cohorts. If they weren't, if some of you are listening to this and getting mad because they weren't, it's not too late. Hopefully, ask if there's any possibility to figure out, more inclusive cohorts, or switching someone who's a potential friend, things like that. It's worth asking, because it's really helpful to think about this in terms of the cohort, because at least right now, I saw, as many of you might have, the DESE commissioner's guidance about everybody going back in person in a couple of months. But while we're still in these hybrid cohort models, that's the way to kind of consider, I think, the social opportunities. And if you're unsure as parents, if you're unsure about your children's cohort members, to whatever degree you have the time and energy to do so, reach out to the teacher, ask about cohort members, contact information for other families that they've approved sharing, of course, so that you can develop some of that as much as possible. Cooperative activities versus competitive activities pre-COVID is a good strategy for friendships, and during the pandemic is even more important around social emotional concerns and learning and health for all students. The idea here, is that cooperative activities involve everybody. Students with Down syndrome should play a meaningful role, not be not a token role. Whereas competitive activities can leave out children, and sometimes, I think certainly they're appropriate in certain contexts, but in terms of friendship, cooperative activities are useful. Shared competitive sports, etc., highly competitive performance, music, drama, etc. There are friendships, bonds that are made in those, but for the most part, especially for younger students, including the most people, cooperative activities are the way to go. So what are some ideas during a pandemic? Whether it's in person or remote, there are ways to do an art project together, prepare a meal together, have a snack together, prepare and have a snack together. Scavenger hunts are great icebreakers. They're great activities in the middle of a school year, or other times as well, and they can be done virtually as well through Zoom, where you ask students. You can do this even with 2 students. It's probably better in a larger group of, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 to 7 or 8. Ask students to find something of a certain color, find something blue, a certain shape, find something round, find something that starts with the letter R in your space, and give kids virtually, if it's by Zoom, or in person, give kids 10 seconds, 20 seconds to find it, come back, and then report out what they found, maybe talk about similar items, laugh about funny items. That's been a really great activity that I've seen my daughter do numerous times, and heard from many other families as well. Non-academic in-school activities can also be done by cohort. These can include lunchtime and recess. Even if school's taught remotely, it would be great. And I don't know how much this happens, to insert some of these in the schedule. My daughter's had remotely lunch, recess, break asynchronously, but if you could do it synchronously online while together, students could actually talk and see each other while they have snack and lunch, or shared recess, shared activities during virtual recess. And I don't know why that hasn't been happening as much. Maybe it is in some places. What activities are happening in your community after school? Through the local municipal park and rec departments, YM or WCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, Audubon Society, etc. There are many places like that for kids or for families that are open to all, and might be offering good pandemic related outdoor activities that could be done by students, children with Down syndrome and their peers. Just checking the time here. I'll begin to wrap up soon. All of this is occurring through technology and maybe various social media these days. So I wanted to highlight a few more specific items. Hopefully at this point, everyone has the necessary equipment to connect, apps that increase accessibility, pre-programming speech devices with appropriate current social lingo, etc. If not, those are all strategies to focus on that could have good positive social outcomes related to friendships. Explicitly teach your students with Down syndrome or other developmental disabilities online rules and etiquette, and especially that are developmentally appropriate. We want to look for reciprocity online and through social media, as we do in in-person interactions. Friendships are reciprocal. So students with Down syndrome should both respond to and initiate contact, accept and extend invitations, etc. And so maybe that involves parent or family members. As a sibling, that's a good sibling thing role, a good sibling supportive role. To the degree you can, consider and try to support students to look their best when they're on Zoom. It's in our homes. You know, I've had days in my sweats and not showering till later, if at all, myself. But you know, appearance matters differently, but matters for students of all ages to some degree. And so to the degree that we can support and control students to be well received, it's, you know, in the name of diversity and equity, everybody's valued as they are, but appearance does matter to youth and adolescents. Is there a way to incorporate items that positively represent your child or student's personality and interests and valued roles behind them while they're on Zoom? Is there a way to add things that they like, things that they're good at into their background when they're on Zoom? One activity, and it reflects that strategy, is to make some kind of poster that summarizes interests or achievements, and hang that up behind them as well. And then students are connecting online and through social media during this time period, in addition to those days that aren't too cold or icy when we can get outside. So to what degree can your children and students send emails or texts, video chat, play interactive video games together, Zoom music parties, watching a movie together or a show on Netflix and other platforms have adapted to allow that? Could have a virtual tea party. I mentioned art projects, synchronous art projects through Zoom or other types of, you know, woodwork, whatever someone's interested in, you know, can happen with a little bit of forethought and creativity. Maybe you have to drop off materials to someone's house ahead of time or ask the parents to pick something up. But these are all things that schools have initiated, that families have initiated for virtual birthday parties or just social opportunities that, to the degree you can, are ways to connect and promote friendship during this time. Old school is important too. Send postcards and letters. Start a chain letter that goes through snail mail. Pair or group students to be pen pals, which could also happen electronically. These are other strategies, ways to stay connected. My daughter, again, in 3rd grade, has been part of a sticker club. One of her friends from preschool sent it to her, and it's kind of like a pyramid scheme idea where she had to send the letter to 6 friends and ask them to send it to 6 friends. And then she also sent stickers to the person who sent her the letter. So eventually you're going to get stickers from 6 times 6 times 6 people, I think, is the idea. And that's, something that she got excited about and was really, really happy about. She's received postcards from family members, but also friends. And it is pretty cool. And you can incorporate, some learning, writing skills, reinforcing certain skills as you write a postcard or letter as well. As always, this is a pre-COVID strategy, and also, you're having your IEP meetings, I presume. Remember to utilize the IEP for friendship. LRE includes non-academic, least restrictive environment includes non-academic settings, which could come to play during the pandemic. Social emotional learning, anti-bullying is something that all schools are paying attention to, and you can incorporate promoting friendship into some of those initiatives. Working with peers, peer-mediated instruction and support is an intervention that could be written into an IEP. Group work can be written into an IEP. Specific social skill goals can be written into an IEP. And if you're writing a social skill goal, remember that a social skill in and of itself is not friendship. It can help friendship. So make sure you write in that the skills, social skills, are generalized to naturally occurring interactions with peers in natural settings. So hopefully this has been helpful. We're under an hour here, which was my goal. As you've seen, there are many strategies to promote friendships between students with and without Down syndrome. The strategies emphasize maximizing social opportunities that can lead to the development of meaningful and authentic friendships. Ultimately, we want students with and without Down syndrome to share motivating and authentic experiences together, because friendships are more likely to develop when students get to know each other and enjoy their time together. And despite the many barriers during this uncertain and challenging time, there are lots of different ways that can happen. And so hopefully this has been helpful in that regard. So let's all work together to move from social acceptance and daily greetings to meaningful interactions and authentic friendships for students with and without Down syndrome, even during times of restricted contact. Please feel free to reach out to me with specific questions about this presentation or about your child's or student's social opportunities. I love problem solving, thinking about ways to increase or improve social interaction opportunities. Please reference the Making Friends with and Without Disabilities in School toolkit that I wrote for the Widening the Circle project with Jim Ross. And I'm forgetting the third person, but it's housed at the Arc of Mass. It's a free PDF download. for if you register with your email. And have a good rest of the conference, a good rest of the day, and good luck during the rest of the pandemic. Thank you so much for taking the time. Take care.